speaking from experience, when I was a reporter, although that was decades ago, but I was placed in a situation that I didn't even realize at that point was harassment. But later on, I realized, kaya pala I felt like I did something wrong. When in fact, the feeling of a victim, na yung I did something wrong. It was my fault. Bakit ako pumayag na, to go out with him or ganon. So, yung ganon na lessons, that should be shared with all women, in fact, not just women journalists.
Dito sa What the F, imbes na magmura, pag-uusapan natin ang mga maiinit na issue.
Bubusisiin at iintindihin natin. Mahirap ng maloko.
Makinig sa What the F.
Welcome sa What the F, ang podcast ng VERA Files kung saan hinihimay natin ang mga issue na minsan naman talaga ay napapasabi na lang tayo na what the F. Ang topic natin today, issues and challenges faced by women journalists. So today, we have two guests with us. But ang una nating guest ay si Ami Cabusaw, Editor-in-Chief ng Mindanao Times, ang longest-running community newspaper sa Mindanao since 1946. Si Ms. Ami ay recipient rin ng Datu Bago Award noong 2017 for promoting press freedom and building capacities of campus and community journalists. Ang Datu Bago Award ay ang pinakamataas na award na binibigay sa mga Dabawenyo for contributing to the development of the city with exemplary competence. Ms. Ami, welcome to the show.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Ami. Ang susunod nating guest ay si Ms. Nini Caballero. Ms. Nini is the former editor-in-chief of Sunstar Cebu, the leading newspaper in Metro Cebu and the province of Cebu. A pioneer and advocate of digital transformation initiatives in Philippine community journalism, she led Sunstar's transition from print to digital as its director of content. Currently, Ms. Nini also serves as a columnist at Sunstar Cebu. This November, she was given the Glory Award for Community Journalism, which the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication gives to distinguished alumni for their exceptional contributions in the various fields of mass communication. Ms. Nini, we're so glad to have you on the show po.
Hello, Chin. Yes, thank you.
Thank you
for inviting me.
Thank you as well po. So, let's dive into it. One thing that binds us in this room po, apart from the fact that we are all women in media, is that all three of us are part of We Move, or the movement for the safety and welfare of women journalists. Ang We Move ay isang consortium ng women journalists established mainly to forward the protection of women working in media in the Philippines. Minsan kasi yung topic ng issues of women journalists, hindi siya masyadong nagsasurface po, di ba? Minsan in hushed tones we speak about it. But in larger forums, we don't. So this podcast is one way we're trying to raise the discussion in a more public forum po. Let's start with our first question po. For you po, ano ba ang challenges of being a female journalist here in the Philippines?
In Davao City, most of our top-level management are women. There was even a time when all editors of newspapers and TV stations and most of the radio stations were really run by women. But I can say that just because it's run by women, our situation was better. I cannot say that because there's no survey about that. But I think it's the kind of news that we are more like sensitive to the stories that are coming out. And since we have the Women Development Code, and we're all part of that, because there's a committee on media, and I sit as the co-chair of that committee, we ensure that people who complain about how stories are coming out in media, they have a venue for doing that. Still, we do hear of a lot of complaints, now, especially when it comes to coverage in the field. Of course, our stories in Davao City ranges from some conflict or disasters or whatever. So some women, they find it very difficult to go out in the field, where the resource persons, the military, for instance, would prefer men. Because of course, when they bring women, they have to be very careful, because it's in the mountains, or it's very difficult to go to that particular area. So parang may ganon na we're not really seen as parang equal to men when it comes to coverage in difficult situations.
Yes, similar experience also. Siguro I can categorize the issues confronting women journalists into two. One is on the field or outside, and then the other is internal then, within the company itself, no? So sa field, merong harassment of women journalists. Sometimes the problem is the women journalists do not even recognize it as harassment. Ayun ang problem with harassment. Sometimes you think na, it was a friendly gesture, an invitation, an innocent invitation. We have a lot to learn, diba, on what can happen on the field. But that's one of the issues. The second is, na-mention din ni Ami, yung naman, yung may special needs or may requirements din ng women journalists as women. Example of that lang, yung restroom, no? It's difficult when you're out in field covering an emergency situation, crisis situation. There are concerns. Internally naman, there can also be sexual harassment in the office, in the newsroom. And again, the problem is sometimes we don't even recognize it as such. So that in itself is a problem. And second is, we may have policy or guidelines, pero parang ang implementation is still wanting. Like even victims would rather not report the incident. So internally, there have to be a mechanism to encourage them to, speak out and protect their rights. So ganun yung issues then that we face, and I think it's a universal thing. For me, it's not about the age. Yung issues that we face crosses generations, in fact, or age, diba, na boundary. Speaking from experience, when I was a reporter, although that was decades ago, but I was placed in a situation that I didn't even realize at that point was harassment. But later on, I realized, kaya pala I felt like I did something wrong. When in fact, the feeling of a victim, na yung I did something wrong. It was my fault. Bakit ako pumayag na, to go out with him or ganon. So, yung ganon na lessons, that should be shared with all women, in fact, not just women journalists.
For Mindanao Times, most of our reporters are women. In fact, now all of our reporters are women, and usually we talk about it freely, like but they say that this, for instance, this officer, they don't really feel comfortable because so they tell us. I mean, it's nice also to provide a safe space for our reporters to talk about what they have experienced, so that they will not keep it to themselves, no? So that they can, so that we will also know and do something about it, because that really happens. So especially during coverage, we provide a safe space for our women journalists.
How I wished we talked about it more often within the newsroom. Kasi hindi eh. I realized belatedly, merong mga nangyayari, pero I get to know about it after the person has left. May incident lang that we really conducted an investigation, took action, which led to the drafting of our anti-sexual harassment policy in the newsroom. But it's after I retired na medyo naging active ako and a few other women journalists in women issues. And then meron kaming group, it's called STET, Women in Cebu Media. yung matagal na namin na form yan, mga mid-1980s pa, when we were reporters. That was a time na there was political instability, the overthrow of the Marcos dictatorship, and it was a volatile era talaga for journalists. So we were able to band together. But we did not talk about sexual harassment. Parang hindi pa pinag-uusapan yan noon eh. Ang issues namin were corruption, di ba? Corruption in media, about news sources, not telling us the truth. Those were the issues that we confronted at that time. So ngayon lang nilalabas, siguro we're more aware now, diba, of our rights. And doon lang lumalabas yung issues, mga threats to women journalists. And Step, since most of us are now retired, you would think we have more time. Actually, hindi rin. Medyo may mga own concerns na rin. Pero we took the time talaga to talk about it, number one. And second, to come up with a venue to speak with junior journalists or younger women journalists about these issues. It was really eye-opening and surprising at the same time yung mga issues na inilabas nila na which are now, topics that we can take up in future discussions with them or with others as well. So ang ganda. All these are belatedly, but buti na nga yan, better late than never, di ba?
That's right. And I think also we were confronted with urgent issues of, of corruption, of mga what's going on in our city, that we forget that we also have concerns. We don't really dwell on what ang sa atin is we have to get the story, get sources, hindi pa yung sa atin individually what we feel.
Thank you po. And actually, I agree. And sometimes I feel like journalists don't want to talk about themselves kasi nga we don't want to become the news. But I think talking about these problems, you're not making yourself the news. You're just trying to make your workplace a better working environment po, di ba? Parang we do stories on safety in different sectors. Pero how about in our own newsrooms? Napapag-uusapan pa natin siya. I wanted to mention this study by WAN-IFRA, or the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers po. So sila actually, they carried out the study documenting the extent of sexual harassment in newsrooms. They did this in 20 countries, including the Philippines. Among its findings was that 41% of women journalists have experienced verbal and or physical sexual harassment in the workplace. However, only 1 in 5 reported the incident. Do you recognize this in your work po?
Yeah, I think so. It's not only journalists, women journalists, but women in general. We don't really, because there's a stigma, diba, that if you report, parang it's your fault, diba? You're shamed because you allowed it. It's as if really it's your fault. So a lot of women are still very hesitant to share what they've experienced. So yeah, not only in the newsroom but also in general, women in general, they don't report because after they report, what do they do?
That's sad nga eh, kasi di ba merong victim blaming din na it's your fault. Why did you go out? Why did you say yes? Why did you even why did you dress that way? I mean, that shouldn't even be an issue. Grabe ang victim blaming. So that's one deterrent for victims to come out and report the incident. Another reason perhaps is you report and then what happens? Ikaw pa nga ang matatanggal while the harasser may even remain in the office. Ikaw pa ang either ma-transfer or matanggal. And then I think the same study mentioned about the rate also of action taken on the harassers. Now, it's very low. Range would be from a reprimand to just a transfer to another office. So that's not really reassuring to any victim, di ba? Why then would you take that effort, come out in public or at least in the company na you were victimized tapos ganun lang pala ang mafe-face mo. So it's sad.
It really is sad, and basically hindi rin natanggal sa newsroom yung harasser na nalilipat lang in maybe a different office, but it's still there.
Usually naman, they are those who are in positions, higher positions, na parang they're very, very, very close to the owners. So parang, and then sometimes then yung parang, di ba mga lalaki, I mean, they, it's parang part of their being macho and it's brotherhood somehow.
And that's why it's necessary talaga for newsrooms to at the least come up with a policy, kasi merong iba na wala pang ang policy. Meron namang iba may policy pero wala yung process of implementation or yung grievance na process that would somehow also protect the victim. Kasi kung ang process lang parang ordinary HR protocol on receiving it's different when it comes to sexual harassment.
It's not enough.
Sexual attacks, di ba? It points to the need talaga for more action in, number one, acknowledging there's a problem, and second, doing something about it. Something that would really work, hindi yung just for the sake of telling people, yes, we have a sexual harassment.
They not aware of what sexual harassment is. Okay lang, may policy tayo. Pero sa kanila, kumbaga, sa isip nila, do they really take it seriously? Kasi I think that's one problem. That's why they're not gonna handle it because either they don't understand it or they don't take it seriously.
Yeah, or that they just think the victim is too sensitive and not fun and not game. Na walang sense of humor when it was just really, they were just playing around.
I was just wondering, how can men help address these? Even though they also face the same issue on harassment, but we also see that men are often perpetrators of harassment as well. How can men help address these issues?
First, they should understand the rights of women. That they should they should be sensitive on this gender issue before they can help us or before they can do something. Kasi sa kanila, it's not really an issue. I mean, when even if they are a family man and they see this very pretty lady and then they should first understand gender so that they can help themselves. They can change their lives.
Siguro we can also involve them na in the conversation. Hindi naman porque men, they have that tendency. Hindi naman There are a lot of men I know who are sensitive also to women rights, or equality, gender equality. Involve them in that conversation because they can also champion for us, di ba? Our rights. So, ganun siguro how to go about it. And then, education talagang dapat ma-continue yan because we have the appropriate laws to promote gender balance or gender equality. So, hindi naman nagkulang sa laws So, it's also yung for them to learn about it and
that's right.
Realize na mali pala yung even catcalling, mali pala, illegal pala yun, di ba?
Oo, kasi tayo, di ba, a woman goes by, they whistle or they, parang ganyan. So, mga sexy. It's words are also very uncomfortable with words, saying, oh, you're so cute, that's not, I find that very inappropriate. Especially coming from men in positions of power. That's why really, when they say that, even if they're talking to me, I would really tell them that you cannot just do that.
That's the problem of men, their sensitivity to words. Kasi sa kanila, it's just, something they say off the cuff.
Yeah.
Hindi nila iniisip.
Nothing.
It's not just a word. It means
and then they say, oh, but that's showing how they appreciate. But you don't need those kinds of words. Because you appreciate them. So, no.
Maakala nila katuwaan lang or yun nga words of appreciation. They don't recognize na it's uncomfortable.
They think we're happy.
The recipient. Sometimes even not just the words, but yung non-verbal lingering na hawak sa kamay after you do a handshake. Mga ganoon po. That's true. We need to have conversations about it.
You also have to call them out, Tell them na you're not comfortable with it. Kasi gano'n naman ang indication of harassment if you feel uncomfortable about it, that's harassment. Even if the other person will say, no, I was just trying to be fun. I was just, complimenting her good looks. Ikaw ba yung masama for reacting badly to it, to the compliment. But tell them, they have to know that, ay, mali pala itong ginagawa ko because it affected the other person. If the other person is a news source, gagamitin pa yan against the woman reporter. Diba?
Yes.
Kaya you have to put your foot down and say,
right.
hey, no, stop.
People are not blind to what's happening, Even in a press conference, na they see na may isang babaeng nata-target ng whether a fellow reporter or by the source, there are others naman who recognize it as wrong and say so. No? So they're not blind to it. Pero mostly, however, minsan nasa victim rin na parang I don't do about anything na lang about it. No, let it pass and so on. So, yun lang na people notice it and action should have been taken. Unfortunately, not all the time.
Which is also why we need to create safe spaces as well, so that there's recognition, but there's also a group you can go to where you can share what's happening with you and maybe try to come up with solutions. Speaking about safe spaces po, safe spaces come in many different forms. It could be a physical space, or maybe it's a group of people, not necessarily a physical space. So one of the safe spaces are peer-to-peer support groups where women in media can talk about issues, share experiences, get to know mechanisms that are available and that they can avail of in an unsafe newsroom or a working environment. And I wanted to touch on STET po. So, Miss Nini already gave us an idea of what STET is. So, in Cebu, they have established STET, a group of women journalists, active and retired, based in the province. It was born in the mid-1980s, and for years, it has been doing small, intimate, off-the-record sessions. But last September, it had this big forum where, among other topics, they talked about the need to create safe spaces for journalists, specifically for women journalists. For Miss Nini, who is one of the many strong women journalists behind the September Forum, what has been the impact of that gathering in Cebu po, across generations?
Ang magandang nangyari niyan is that now, STET is deciding to expand its membership. Kasi noon parang kami lang talaga, we're very close friends, we stuck together through the decades of work. So ngayon we're bringing in the younger ones, and we had our first meeting with a small group of younger women journalists, and they said that they will help reach out to the others and tell them about things that we can do. Ang number one is on the welfare and safety of women journalists. They really want a discussion and action plan on this. So we mentioned about work-related women issues, yung relationship nila with their editors, this harassment in the workplace, and they also mentioned yung mental health issues that they face.
I think there's a treasure trove of untapped learnings, untapped information that we can really learn from the journalists on whose shoulders we stand on. Wow! Miss Ami, have you had a similar gathering
sa Davao? I meet with mga Gen Z journalists. We gather and we talk about una yung mga very casual things like how are they, what ano yung status nila, are they still working with mga ganyan, and then kasi para yung economic, yung survival, yung immediate na, di ba, that brings you together, and then you talk about yung issues dito sa Davao. But then of course I organized yung women journalists covering the Bangsamoro region, kasi sila iba naman yung situation nila. So And parang they approach it parang individually, but when they found out that pwede pala na sila, they can find parang strength in each other, that they can be together in coverages, that they can parang, they found parang strength in that. Parang they found also inspiration in what they were all doing. Especially those who are in Maguindanao, for instance, in Sultan Kudarat. That is very silent, no? They cover, but other than that, they don't do anything. But now parang they're on their own. They have parang good stories. They have tinawag nila yung mga stories of change, yung ganyan, yung mga sinusulat nila.
But I really like what Miss Ami said, yung strength in togetherness. That's what I took from it, na the journalists felt na they're braver.
That's why it's important now for yung mentorship programs to be instituted within newsrooms, no, or media organizations. Kasi yung mga bata na journalists, they really need guidance. They're new to this. They don't know how to address that. These situations that they face now are not even taught in school. They really need mentorship on, how to address these challenges that they face.
So I think in the conversation that we had today, I hope our listeners, whether they are journalists or not, maybe some of them nakarelate dun sa mga pinag-usapan natin, whether it's in the issues that we face or what in the things that need to be done. Baka nakarelate sila or baka nakakuha rin sila ng idea na maybe we need to start these conversations in the spaces where we are. But I'd like to thank you again, Miss Ami and Miss Nini, for being with us for today's episode of What the F podcast. And with that, I think we can end na po. Thank you so much again po.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Chin. Any discussion on this would help broaden awareness. So it's a small step, but it can lead to something that we hope would have impact.
Yes, that's right. That's so right.
Definitely po.
Dito sa What the F podcast, walang murahan, usapang facts lang. Pakinggan kami sa YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcast at Apple Podcast.